What's the most unsettling revelation you've uncovered about someone you're close to? I found out when I was 20 years old that my granddad had a 10-year-long affair during his relationship with his wife. This happened whilst they had kids, my dad and my aunt. The revelation and paranoia during the affair made my non very mentally unwell. She ended up being hospitalized in a psychiatric facility and given shock therapy for her mental breakdown. They're still together. I never knew any of this. I always felt their relationship wasn't healthy. As a kid, it really didn't sink in until I got older, and then I found all this out. Really crazy and conflicting stuff. Outed by pedophile hunters for trying to meet up with an underage girl, and ended up in court. Suddenly, I've no idea what sort of punishment he received, but I know he never went to jail where he belongs. My husband of 20 years didn't have a very low libido. He was secretly using pornography daily. I always knew something was wrong, but every time I asked, he reassured me that he was extremely attracted to me, that I was perfect for him, that he wouldn't change a thing. When something felt wrong, there was always a plausible explanation. It's been 8 months since my discovery. I have paralyzing low self-esteem, nightmares, night terrors. I've become an alcoholic. I self-harm, and I've developed an eating disorder. My step-family, my only family now that my dad passed away, just put down a dog with a treatable illness because they didn't want to give me even a day to find somewhere to bring him. They killed an animal they had for almost a decade. Told me they had no money for his vet care. I was doing it all since November. They came up with the euthanasia money in 5 minutes. They could have solved the problem months ago with the money they used to kill him. I now don't know how to continue a relationship with them. There was a guy my now ex-husband and I were longtime friends with. For some reason, it ended up just me and him going for dinner. Him, it's so nice to actually do this in real life. Me do what? Him pretend you're my wife. Turns out he would be home at night and fantasize about us being together. The friendship was a little strained after that. I never told my husband because I didn't want the guy beat to shit. We divorced not long after, so I made a easy getaway from the guy. In October 2019, I was in a car accident with my friends, including my best friend, who was driving, and her 3-year-old nephew. Spent the night at the hospital, but were all fine afterwards. It could have ended badly. 5 years later, my best friend confesses to me that it wasn't an accident. She crashed a car on purpose because she wanted to kill herself. She's been through some mental illness issues lately. So when she told me, I pretended to be understanding. But I was low-key furious with her. My grandfather and uncle were pastors and ran a small church in our community. They welcomed a pedophile into our congregation without telling anyone because God forgives. This man was invited into my parents' home and spent time alone with my brother when he was 4. No one knows what went on, if anything, and my brother can't remember a thing. It's completely changed my opinion of them both. Forgiveness is one thing, but there were so many kids in our church, including their own family. My best friend of 15 years is a pathological liar and a gambling addict. Found out recently after he had borrowed a decent amount of money from each and everyone in our friends group. No one said anything to anyone until now cause we all thought he needed our help. Then when he wasn't paying us back, we talked to each other and found out. It's been a few depressing weeks since, trying to figure out how to handle things with all the lies that have been and will be said from his part. My mum told me that my maternal grandmother got into an argument with my bio grandpa and they were teenagers. He drove off without her, so she walked home. She was nearly raped and beaten to death by 2 men. She was only 16 at the time, and she was never the same after. It broke my heart to hear that. I was never close to that grandma, but now I understand why she was a very angry person. Intergenerational trauma is all too real. During an argument my parents had while they were drunk, I could hear my dad accusing my mum of cheating on her with a friend, getting pregnant from him and aborting the child afterwards. At that moment I was pretty shocked. I was 17 back then. The next morning I asked them both for clarification. Apparently the cheating part isn't true, But my mum was pregnant again when I was 8, and I somehow never noticed. I found out my mum was regularly helping her friend send money to his wife and kids in his home country. The friend also happens to have a wife in our country who knew nothing about his secret second family, and who is also good friends with my mum. Apparently he visits them every summer while pretending to be with his parents. Found out when I was 13, and I never looked at my mum the same way again. When I was newly widowed, an acquaintance who had lost his wife many years ago was very supportive and one day came over to bring food and chat. That night he admitted to me that his wife had been killed by a drunk driver, and he found that person and broke his kneecaps. I'm not saying I don't get it, but it was rather chilling to hear from a person that you interact with in real life about everything, and even though I wasn't the one who had been harmed in any way, it destroyed our relationship. And while we still keep contact, our brotherhood has been long gone and will never recover. One of my best friends from high school ended up in prison for molesting a mentally challenged little girl. Never, ever would have thought he'd do something like that, and he proclaimed his innocence the whole time. But I can't associate with him now. He just got out a few months ago and reached out to me. That's a friendship that just has to stay in the past. When I was young, probably 7 or 8, my bio dad would take me on the road with him, truck driver. And he would play this game with me where he would blindfold me and make me guess what I was tasting. It wasn't until siblings and cousins came forward that I put two and two together. It was pretty unsettling, you could say. Wasn't exactly close to him, but I found out my fellow assistant manager coworker was a registered sex offender when I used to work retail. I was checking out a random customer and he told me. Googled my coworker's name after that. And sure enough, there he was on the registry along with what he did involving minors. A friend of mine is a Neil Young fan, not like a passive fan either. He has attended more than 300 Neil Young concerts, which means he has likely spent an entire year of his life listening to a man that sounds like an overgrown toddler begging for candy at the grocer's. Can't look at the guy the same way now. High school best friend had brain tumor. Her health was important to me and definitely a factor to why we even got close. She needed a friend. She was sick. 20 years later she mentioned there never was any tumor, any cyst, anything. All made up. Felt like my friendship was never real. Found out my ex-stepfather, the man who raised me when my abusive father didn't have time for me, was molesting my sister. I still don't like to think about it. We didn't find out until my sister was in rehab for meth. Meth she's smoking to avoid thinking about her childhood trauma. My ex had a friend that loved to talk about how sexy Disney children were. Knew instantly he was a pedophile, but my ex refused to believe it. It was no surprise to find him in the news with a mugshot for child pornography. Everyone acted surprised, but I wasn't. My husband's friend admitted to me to running over someone with his car and not stopping in a coke-fueled rager. He said he doesn't know if he killed him, but said he didn't get up. I tried to look it up, but I couldn't find anything. The old man I stayed with for a year so not to move senior year HS, and was a family friend and easily in the top 10 richest of my country, had a thing for young teen girls. Sweet old 78-year-old who had a harem of 13-year-olds. I've seen someone's diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder, and it made their whole personality make sense and shed a very different light on many things about them. For those who don't know, that's a psychopath or sociopath. A few years after my mum passed, my aunt told me that my mother had been raped by her other sister's husband's brother, and that my oldest sibling is likely the product of that rape. None of my other siblings know. My dad's best friend since childhood, an honorary uncle, wasn't just an appliance and TV repairman but a hitman for the mob. When he died, the attached case my dad held for him was stuffed with cash and guns. Not really close to, but more used to be close to ... Found out while still married to her that my ex used to be a hooker. Had to do some serious STI testing after that little revelation. Another one about my family. I found out my great uncle was a member of the Nazi Party. I won't go into detail for privacy reasons, but he was a very high ranking. I found this very disturbing. The day it finally clicked, and I realized my dad was a serial child molester who had been abusing me for 11 years. This also led to the revelation of why people try to kill themselves. Learned from an out that my alcoholic and abusive father and his equally disastrous brothers were the victims of a handsy priest. Doesn't forgive anything he did but explains a lot. My dad killed his neighbor and got away with it. He prophesied this to me 15 years before it happened. And he married the dead guy's wife and now owns all his property. I wasn't super close to him, but I recently discovered that my great-grandfather was 34 and he had a daughter with an 13-year-old girl. Thanks for that info, Ancestry. After my dad died, found out from my mum that my dad used to verbally abuse her and beat me more than once when I was younger. I apparently blocked those memories out. My mum is an abusive parent and manipulated me to believe it was normal and who she is. Luckily, I'm in therapy, but I'm deeply uncomfortable around my parents now. My mum's best friend couldn't read or write. When I found out, I was shocked because she ran the whole neighborhood. She was very smart. My mum taught her to read.